And welcome, everybody. This is the Appraiser Coach Podcast. My name is Dustin Harris. Can't wait to introduce you to my guest. Want to remind you first, we are sponsored by three great companies. First of all, Working RE Magazine. If you have not been on their website recently, I would highly encourage that you do so. It's workingre.com. Working RE is in realestate.com. We're also sponsored by DataMaster. DataMaster is what I use when I can. It's only in some of the areas that I cover, but I love the opportunity to save 30 to 60 minutes per report. That's DataMaster. You can go to datamasterfreetrial.com/coach. Once again, I'll slow it down, datamasterfreetrial.com/coach. And finally, we are sponsored by a la mode. A la mode is the software that I've been using for over 20 years. You should be using it as well. Go to alamode.com, or you can call them at 800-ALA-MODE. Well, folks, I want to, right off the top, those of you who are on the Coach Cam, welcome. Glad you've joined us on YouTube and various other sources. Apologize right up front. We're still in a temporary studio. I know I keep saying that. I want to get it right. I thought we would actually be able to come to you with our new studios today, but unfortunately the lighting did not work. And you're saying, Dustin, the lighting's not working right now, whatever you're doing. And you're right, but it was 10 times worse. Trust me, you could not even see my face. Well, actually, that might be a positive thing. I don't know. So I apologize. I've got this side of my face glowing. I've got this side. It's kind of like the angel on one shoulder, the devil on the other. So you'll just have to put up with it. But I want to introduce you folks to a guest that's actually been on our show before, a friend of mine, Mr. Mike Brunson. Mike is an active appraiser in the Las Vegas area. He's the past president of the National Association of Appraisers, sometimes known as the NAA. He's a current chairman of the board for the NAA. Mike is a USPAP instructor, an excellent USPAP instructor from what I'm told. I've never taken a class from Mike, but I've actually heard him speak on several occasions, and he is excellent at what he does. He's been on the program before when he talked about the summit in Las Vegas. Most importantly, he shoots guns. And so, Mike, welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks, Dustin. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Well, you know, Mike, there's a reason I wanted to have you on, and I think you know why. You've been an outspoken individual on a positive side and educating appraisers across the nation on this thing we call evaluations. I know sometimes people call it evaluations. Talk to us about that word, first of all. What does an appraiser need to know about the term evaluation?
Well, there's some confusion, and I hear people a lot of times they'll say, you know, what is this desktop appraisal thing?
Yeah.
Or what are these desktop evaluations? and I think it's important to understand that there's a distinction between a desktop assignment or a desktop appraisal and an evaluation.
Okay.
Desktop is a referral to the scope of work. It just means that you're conducting your analysis from your desktop. You're not going out into the field. You're not conducting an interior inspection of the property. You're not driving by the exterior of the property. So an appraisal and an evaluation can be conducted as a desktop.
Okay.
Little fly in my throat there, sorry. The evaluations are defined by FIREA, Public Law 101-73, and they're also defined in the Interagency Evaluation or Appraisal and Evaluation Guidelines.
Okay.
And the reason they're important for appraisers to understand is because evaluations, they're basically appraisals conducted by parties who are not appraisers that are viable for use in the federally related transaction realm under certain circumstances. Generally, it has to be fall under one of the exemptions, right?
Okay, so let me stop you there for a second, just to clarify before we move forward, because I admit it, Mike, I've been confused on this as well. So a desktop is not an evaluation, but an evaluation can be, not necessarily is, a desktop.
Very well said.
Okay. I don't know what I said, but I'll take that. So continue then. Help us understand the distinguish. You said something that's kind of scary, and I know we're going to get into that a little bit later. But I just want to clarify. You said an evaluation is not necessarily an appraisal. In fact, it is not an appraisal. Is that what you said?
It depends on who conducts it.
Okay. So it's the person conducting, because what you said was an evaluation can be done by anybody, or maybe I'm putting words in your mouth. Maybe not anybody, but it doesn't have to be an appraiser, right?
It does not have to be an appraiser. Here's what I would recommend. To have any intelligent conversation about an evaluation.
You know, that's tough with me, Mike, to have an intelligent conversation.
Well, I disagree with that. But I mean, when we're talking to professional appraisers out there, there's a lot of misunderstanding. So here's my advice.
Okay.
Before anybody engages in a discussion, heated or otherwise, about evaluations versus appraisal, please go get a copy of FIREA,
okay.
Public Law 101-73, and read the history. It'll explain to you the history of how the Appraisal Foundation, the Appraisal Subcommittee came into existence. It'll tell you who really regulates the appraisal profession. It's the FFIEC, the CFPB, and now, who is it? The FHFA. Used to be the FFIRA plus HUD. Now it's the FFIRA plus the CFPB and FIFA. So, and that was amended under Dodd-Frank. But if you just read through FIREA, you'll have a much better understanding about the history of appraisal regulation and the difference between appraisals and evaluations. Now, if you really want to get into a discussion of evaluations, you got to go over to the Interagency Appraisal and Evaluations Guideline. One of the best places to get that document, you can go to the ASC website, asc.gov, and they'll give you links to all of these documents. And you can just read through, and it'll explain to you the difference between an appraisal and an evaluation. There are a lot of similarities. They're both required to be accurate. They're both required to be completed by a party who demonstrates the ability to accurately provide credible and reliable information.
But isn't that one of the controversies, is they don't define what that actually means? In other words, I've heard individuals say, well, realtors can do this, brokers can do this, construction guys can do this. Basically, anybody that's had any experience, and that's loose as well, is it not? As far as real estate goes, then all of a sudden they can do this type of work.
So I'm looking right now at the Interagency Appraisal and Evaluation Guidelines. And if you read through it, it says, quote, this is section 8 of section, now this is section 8 on page, what would it be, for anybody who wants to double check me, 77458 of the Federal Register, volume 75, number 237. So it says, although the agency's appraisal regulations exempt certain real estate related financial transactions from the appraisal requirements, most real estate related financial transactions over the appraisal threshold are considered federally related transactions and thus require appraisals.
Okay.
So calm down a little bit when you hear the word evaluations. It doesn't mean that appraisals are going away, but be aware that just if we're talking volume and you compare the number of appraisals that are completed in a calendar year to the number of evaluations that are completed in a calendar year, or if you really get into the numbers and you look at the amount of money spent on appraisals in a calendar year versus the amount of money spent on evaluations in a calendar year, the evaluation world eclipses the appraisal world both in volume, number of assignments ordered, and amount paid, and that's economic opportunity for an appraiser, at least in theory.
Okay, so I want to return to the numbers. I don't know if you've got them in front of you, but before we get into the numbers, because you mentioned some numbers here in a video that's on YouTube here a couple of years ago, maybe a year ago, that I think are quite interesting. They're ones that I've repeated as well. But before we get into that, Mike, let's talk a little bit more about the history, because I think most appraisers, myself included, I've been doing this 20 plus years, evaluations are not something that were really in my lexicon until recently. And thus, I say to myself, well, these are fairly new. But that's not accurate, right, Mike? These have been around a while.
They were established when FIREA was established. And prior to FIREA, evaluations were being done. There was just absolutely zero regulation.
Okay, so any idea why this is something that is talked about more frequently now than it was, say 5 to 8 years ago?
Well, I would say there's two reasons. One, appraisers in general and the lending stakeholders are more aware of the opportunity to utilize an evaluation, and just as we'll get into this a little bit, but they're predominantly for credit-related lending as opposed to new money or asset secured lending for real property.
Okay. Go ahead.
But backing up a little bit, the reason they're more prevalent today is because lenders and appraisers are becoming more aware of them, and appraisers are realizing that there is, and this is my opinion, the appraisers are at a disadvantage from performing the evaluations because they are appraisers. Okay. Now, whether or not that's reasonable is a whole large question.
Let's dig into that, because that really was going to be my next question. Is there's a lot of controversy centered around evaluations. There's been a lot of talk, a lot of chatter on the internet. I watch the Facebook groups, I watch the online groups, and these are groups of appraisers talking back and forth. And there's a lot of number one, misunderstanding, which I hope we can dispel today. But there's also a lot of fear surrounding evaluations. So let's talk about what is the big controversy when it comes to appraisers and evaluations.
Well, so here's the deal. Evaluations can be done by any qualified party, and that would include an appraiser. The difference is that if I, as a credentialed appraiser, conduct an evaluation, it rises to the level of an appraisal under USPAC. And so I have to comply with all of the guidelines, standards rules, and general rules of the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice in completing an evaluation.
Which includes the certifications, which includes the work file, everything, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So the difference being that parties who are not appraisers, but who are deemed qualified by the regulated institutions to perform evaluations, they have no such requirement. And therefore, they are able to produce the evaluations faster and cheaper than a professional appraiser can, thereby economically precluding us from participating in those transactions.
Okay, so there's a lot of appraisers out there. Basically what you're saying, Mike, is there's a lot of appraisers out there who have heard of these, who might be interested in them, but say, hey, you know, what they're offering as far as a pay for this type of service, well, screw that, because I've got to do a work file, I've got to do, you know, this, that, and the other, I've got to cross my T's, I've got to dot my I's. This isn't something I can just speed through, and for $50, $100, $150, whatever the case may be, I'll just stick with full appraisals. Thank you very much.
Generally, that's true. Now, here, I was going to send you this, but I thought I'd surprise you with it. Okay. So I'm going to read you an actual email that I got, and I'm going to check with my attorney to make sure that it's okay that I can share it with you. So you can
edit it out if we need to, but I can't
edit it or not. But this is unredacted, exactly the way I received it. I received this on July 8th, 2017 at 8:39 in the a.m. to my inbox.
All right.
And it says from a gentleman, I'm not sure where, but his first name's Ralph.
Okay, we'll do that.
Or at least he claims his first name's Ralph. He says, I'm wondering if you're looking for a BPO virtual assistant. I've encountered different MLSs, and I also do pulling comps in different states, such as Florida, Illinois, New York, Texas, Tennessee, California, Washington, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Virginia, Maryland, Nevada, South Carolina, Massachusetts, and Arizona.
Damn, he would have been better to just say the states he doesn't.
All but, right? And then he says, I believe my past experience for over 3 years handling and managing a team that's specifically working, and I'm reading this as it's written, a team that's specifically working on BPO for real estate agents in U.S., different states and different valuation companies, will best suit to the job. I myself have a vast knowledge in understanding the market and locating all necessary information, such as tax or public records, analyzing the neighborhood trend, and pulling the best comparables that will back up the price opinion of the subject property. Some of my clients also send comparables and additional information, and I just do the data entry. I do understand the work frame and the nature of the job, the quality needed to maintain high rating score of the agent's account to get more assignments from the valuation company. Competitive rates, drum roll please, $8 for full exterior orders and $10 for interior orders. We can start as soon as needed. We can work with your orders in fast phase turnaround time without risking the quality of the orders We can process 10 to 20 orders a day and a maximum of 50. We can send sample of work if asked. However, our team can start right away. Please advise. Thank you.
Well, I'll tell you, Mike, if you haven't already signed up with Ralph, you need to forward that, because, man, and I'm not going to, I'm not hiring him for a quote unquote BPO expert. I'm going to hire him to write my new blog post. That guy's English is impeccable.
Well, hey, listen, it's obviously not his first language, so I can't speak a second language. I'm not going to beat up on him for that. What I am going to say is that if you are a provider of evaluation services, in this case a BPO, and you can pay somebody to, the way I'm reading it, it says that he's going to do all the work, right?
Sure.
You can pay somebody $8 or $10 to do the work, and the BPOs, last time I checked, they range between $40 and $80 that they're getting paid. I really don't need a calculator to do that math, right? So between 5 and 10%, you're paying somebody to do it, and they'll do between 20 and 50 a day. Why wouldn't you jump into this, if you didn't have the threat of a regulator hanging over your head?
Exactly.
If you didn't have USPAP hanging over your head and threatening to come after and take your license away and precluding you from doing all these things, why wouldn't you jump into the business? Right? I mean, as an appraiser, I can't imagine a professional appraiser doing an assignment for $40 or $80, because I've seen the BPOs, and a lot of times they don't ask for one value, they ask for 5 values. Mm-hmm. And they ask for greater analytic reporting than most 1004s do. So an appraiser looks at it and goes, I would never do that, and rightfully so, sure. Right? Because the threat to my license, the liability, it's just not worth it. But we have to understand the reality is that there are tens of thousands of these things being ordered in every MSA every day. And so that's a huge book of business. And in my opinion, just based on the economics, the most qualified individual, that's me and you, credential holders as a professional appraiser, are economically precluded from participating in that book of business because our competition doesn't have to rise to the same level of compliance with standards, professional standards, that we do.
Okay. I want to talk about scope of work, but before I go there, let's go back just a second. You started to talk about numbers before. Again, I don't know if you have those in front of you.
I don't.
But in general, you said there are more evaluations that occur on a regular basis than appraisals. And it's not just a little bit, right, Mike?
It's not a little bit. Now, I've done several of these interviews, and I will be honest that there were some numbers I was throwing around earlier about it being 5 times the number of appraisers. Now, to clarify, that data was given to me, and in reality, it's the value of the BPOs or the evaluations versus the appraisals are roughly 5+ times in the amount spent on the products. The actual number is probably higher than 5 times, but I haven't done the research. I can personally tell you that I walked away from an opportunity where they were going to send me $10,000 a month, one client. And the reason I walked away is because when I tried to alter the report that client wanted me to provide so that I could comply with the uniform standards, their response was, I was pretty sure you were going to say that. We don't want you to change anything. This is what we've always got. This is what we're going to continue to get. And if you can't provide it, we've got plenty of other people who can.
Right. And those plenty of other people, Mike, are not necessarily appraisers. And that's the problem, right?
Well, so here's where it gets a little more muddied from my personal point of view. They're not appraisers, clearly, or they're appraisers that are choosing to violate uniform standards, which I don't believe appraisers are making that conscious decision. So let's assume that they are not appraisers. I don't know if it's a problem. It bothers me that I, as an appraiser, are precluded from participating in a book of business that is much larger than the book of business available to me as a residential appraiser. But I don't know that it's a problem because the users of that service they fully understand what they're getting, and they're in compliance with the federal law. It doesn't require an appraisal, and therefore it doesn't have to be completed by an appraiser.
Right. Okay. So what about these appraisers? And I know we're not talking, we've already distinguished the difference between evaluation and a desktop. I complete desktops, Mike, and I found a way to do it in such a way that's USPAP compliant. I've got a work file. I've got certifications. I believe that my work could stand up before a judge, jury, and a state board, if you will. But one of the ways that I do this is that I look at the scope of work, and it's a diminished, if you will, diminished scope of work. What they need is not the same thing. Now, appraisers are saying, well, you diminish the scope of work, you diminish the quality. I don't think so. Here's the thing. A diminished scope of work would say something to the effect of, we don't need 6 comparables. We don't need 2 active listening. Now, can I do that if I feel it's necessary with this particular assignment? Absolutely. But we're not going out to the property. We don't have wear and tear and gas to pay for on our vehicles. We're not sketching the property. Hey, listeners, I get it. I know and I'm going to get all kinds of hate mail here. You know, there's appraisers out there that won't do drive-bys because the quote unquote liability is higher. Now I've heard Ernie Durbin talk about this, and he says, actually drive-bys are less of a liability because as long as you have the statements in there, you're covered. And I feel the same way with desktops. We're making assumptions based on the best criteria and information that we have. Is that property maybe a Q2 and we considered it a Q3 based on our information? Yes, but our valuation is based on that assumption and based on that extraordinary assumption, if you will, and that hypothetical, if you will, that we are determining that a thing is a certain way that may or may not be the case. So talk to me about this, Mike, as far as the appraisers that are out there doing evaluations, desktops, what have you, maybe a mixture of both. How are they doing this if there's that high bar of liability?
Anybody who's doing evaluations, I'd love to have an honest, intelligent conversation with you about how you're doing it, because I want to get into that market. I haven't found a client that's willing to pay what I think is a reasonable fee to conduct those evaluations with my understanding of the liability that goes along as an appraiser with compliance with USPAP and compliance with the interagency evaluation guidelines. So I really would. Any of your listeners, anybody who ever sees this that wants to have a conversation with me, Dustin, feel free to post my email, okay, and we will correspond, and I would love to have that conversation. Now, as far as desktops or restricted use appraisals, or now these days restricted appraisals, I'm a huge fan. And my practice, we do, over the last probably 3 years, probably 90% of what I'm doing is restricted work, where and you're absolutely right, it's scope of work. Go to AO 11 and look at the advisory opinion 11, go to the table that compares an appraisal report to a restricted appraisal report, and you'll see that the only difference in the scope of work is it says summarize for appraisal report, and it says state for restricted appraisal report in 7 areas. And maybe it's only 5. So hold on, I've got it open. I want to make sure I'm accurate. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so there's 5 differences. There's 4 places where it says state versus summarize, and then there's 1 place where you're required to give a very specific disclaimer when you're doing a restricted appraisal report. And I've heard people say, if you're doing litigation, don't do restricted appraisal reports because it opens you up to providing your work file. The individuals that are saying that maybe don't do as much litigation as they claim to, because if you're doing litigation, your work file is fair game anyway. The opposition is going to subpoena your work file. So you better be prepared to, I think the reference was, get naked right. and show everybody what you were doing when you did your appraisal. If you're doing litigation work, whether you're doing a summary or a restricted, an appraisal report or a restricted appraisal report, that work file is fair game. They're going to come after it.
Right. And not to get off on the weeds here, Mike, but I'll just
Yeah, I'm sorry.
put a plug here for just a second and say, you know, those of you who have not done litigation work, I highly recommend it, simply because it makes you a better appraiser.
Well, so I would agree with the caveat, right? Because there are people who just don't have the intestinal fortitude to do litigation work,
Sure.
right? And I don't mean that as a slight. I mean, it's just there's a lot of people that when somebody else gets up there and challenges your methodology or your report, you take it personally. And if you're going to do litigation work, you just absolutely can't do that. You have to be prepared to just listen to the arguments, face the arguments based on their merit, provide your data, support your data, advocate for your analysis, and then whatever anybody else says, who cares?
Yeah. No, litigation work is not just getting naked. It's being willing to be pointed at and made fun of for every stretch mark. I agree. So, okay, let's back up for just a second and talk about one more thing before we go to the break, and that is we've got this issue. You've set it up perfectly, Mike. You've got this problem, if you will, with evaluations that the clients, they need evaluation done. They're going through the guidelines. They're doing the things that they need to do as far as crossing their T's and dotting their I's, as far as the law goes, the regulations go. And they may be choosing someone different than an appraiser because an appraiser has to, and some appraiser would say should, but nonetheless has to cover their backside. We've got to have a work file. We've got to have the certifications covered. We got to make sure that it's an appraisal. It's an appraisal, and we have appraisers to support our license. Things are changing though, Mike, right? I mean, let's talk about specific state changes that are starting to occur across the nation that might open this financial opportunity up for appraisers.
So, and this, Dustin, I'll be honest with you, it's been a crazy weekend, and I'm having a little bit of a geriatric moment here. I don't remember the specific states that have done this, but
all good.
2 states, I believe, have in their statute recognized that the federal law sees a difference between an appraisal and an evaluation, and they've said in their appraisal statute that if an appraiser in their state conducts an evaluation, that they are not subject to the additional stringent requirements of the Uniform Standards of Professional Appraisal Practice. They're only subject to the interagency appraisal and evaluation guidelines. And so that difference is huge. It reduces your liability significantly, and it opens up the opportunity for a professional appraiser, the best party in my opinion, to conduct an evaluation, to compete economically with non-appraisers, because you don't have this additional level of compliance hanging over your head as an appraiser in that state. Does that make sense?
It does, and I want to fill in the blank here because one of the things I can see is many of my listeners screaming and yelling at their earbuds right now because they're frustrated and they're saying, well, why would I'm an appraiser, I'm a professional, why would I quote unquote stoop to the level of evaluation? And I'm not sure that they're asking maybe the right question, and maybe they are, and that's fine. You know what? I don't judge that individual if that's what they decide. Mike, there's a distinction here between a business decision, okay, and an appraiser saying, I will not perform that type of work. That's a business decision.
Yes.
And there's a difference between that and, say, an appraiser who says, you know what, I'm interested in that, but I feel like my hands are tied because of these regulations.
Sure, and I fall into that second category. I'm interested in participating in that book of business. I haven't figured out a way to do so in a manner that allows me to comply with uniform standards and be economically competitive to the other parties that are offering the same service.
Okay. All right. Mike, we're going to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to play a little game called Myth or Facts. And I think hopefully we'll answer some of the questions that might still be hanging out there. Again, folks, some of this stuff is fresh. It's new. Yeah, they've been around a long time, but they've not been in the spotlight like they have lately. And that's why we wanted to have Mike on and talk about what's going on and how you as an appraiser can get involved. Speaking of getting involved, how would you like to be less involved in the mundane part of your appraisal? And when I say mundane, we're talking tier 1 stuff here, okay? Those who are in my mastermind group understand there's tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 type of work. Tier 1 is basic data entry. It's looking at one screen, looking at a number and typing it into a different screen. In appraisal terms, it's looking at an MLS sheet and typing in the information in your grid on your software. Folks, how would you like to get rid of that step completely and save yourself 30 to 60 minutes per report? DataMaster will allow you to do so. Now, it's still your responsibility to verify that information and make sure that it's accurate, but I guarantee it will be more accurate than you will have with human error when you're trying to go back and forth between two screens, or, heaven forbid, some of you who are still in the dark ages and are printing MLS sheet out physically on a piece of paper. What does that even mean? Okay, folks, DataMaster, check it out. It's datamasterfreetrial.com/coach. You will save 30 to 60 minutes per report. I timed it, folks. About 45 minutes on average that I save, because I have, 5-6 comps in there. I have 1 or 2 listings in there. I've got the subject information. I've got the MC data that I've got to download, all of that in a couple of seconds with DataMaster. If you've not tried them, try them right now. datamasterfreetrial.com/coach. Once again, for 14 days, you can try them at datamasterfreetrial.com/coach. Speaking of being efficient, folks, I have tried other software, all great companies run by great people, friends with a lot of these CEOs and developers. But I can guarantee you that I save more time and efficiency when it comes to my appraisal software. What software is that? Alamode, of course. I've been using it for over 20 years. They've been around for over 30 years, helping appraisers to do appraisals more efficiently with higher quality. And now they have Titan Analytics. If you've not checked that out, you need to go to their appraisal store, their Alamode store, and check out Appraiser Titan Analytics and find out what that can do for you. Speaking of what it can do for you, why don't you try Alamode today? Give them a call, 800-ALAMODE. You can talk to a friendly individual and say, hey, you know what, I'm using XYZ. What is the difference between what I'm using and what you can provide? Go to alamode.com or 800-ALAMODE. Finally, we are sponsored by Working RE Magazine. You know, folks, we've been talking about evaluations today, and we're going to be talking more about that in just a few minutes. But if you want to know what's going on in the appraisal world, such as evaluations, and what kind of a threat does it pose for the appraiser or not, check out Working RE, because Working RE is right on the edge of the cutting edge of technology as far as what's going on in the appraisal world, the profession, the industry, the technology side, and everything else. Check them out. If you've not been there recently, go to workingre.com. Go to workingre, as in workingrealestate.com. All right, folks, we are back with Mike Brunson. Mike, welcome.
Thanks, Dustin.
I really appreciate you taking time today. I know it's been busy for you the last little while. I follow you on Facebook, man, so I know what's going on. You're a busy guy.
Yeah, and just for anybody else who knows what's going on, Wendy's doing okay.
Good, thank you. I'm glad you said that. You've been in the midst of a move, I know, as well, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate you taking time for us today, because this is a confusing thing. This evaluation thing. What is it? What's a desktop? What are the problems that we're dealing with? Before we get into the myths and facts here, anything else that we might have missed here that I think the listeners, that you feel the listeners would need to know about evaluations, maybe the concerns, maybe where we're going, how we can get involved?
Dustin, I think we covered it pretty well. But again, I would remind anybody who really wants to understand this issue, they need to get a copy of FIREA and understand where this difference between appraisal and evaluations originated. They then need to look at the interagency appraisal and evaluation guidelines and really understand the similarities and the differences between an evaluation and an appraisal, because some parties won't do their due diligence, they won't understand the difference, and they put themselves at risk, especially if they're appraisers credentialed in their state. They put themselves at risk by performing evaluations thinking that they will not be held to the higher standard. And unless they're one of those states where it's been explicitly excluded or carved out in their statute, they are putting their actual license at risk.
Right. Now, and let's talk about that for a second, because liability side, I know there have been people out there talking about liability when it comes to these types of products, and many of them make arguments such as, well, these are mostly in-house. They're not being sold on the secondary market. They don't go through Fannie Mae. Typically it's asset valuation, it's portfolio valuation. It might be for a HELOC, but does the customer really get a copy? and are they that worried about it because it's such a low, loan to value? And I think some of that is accurate, but to then make the leap and say, well, there's, much less liability. This is never going to come up before a state board. This is never going to come before a judge and a jury. This is never going to come before a reviewer. That's baloney, right, Mike? I mean, it's an appraisal, right?
Every assignment that I put my name on, I assume that it's going to end up in front of the state appraisal board or commission, and it's sometime somewhere a judge is going to take a look at it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. That leads us into the favorite part of the program, and that is the game show that I'm going to host, and it's called Evaluations, Myth or Fact. Some of these things we've already talked about, but I just want to, in the end here, kind of consolidate everything that we've been talking about. Just as kind of a nutshell of here's where we're at with these. So you ready for this, Mike?
I'm ready.
All right, here we go. So the first one, myth or fact, evaluations are not an appraisal.
It depends. So,
wait a minute, that wasn't a choice.
Well, but hey, anybody who's done litigation knows
there you go.
There's always a third option, right? So it's a fact if the party completing the evaluation is not a credentialed appraiser. Okay. They are not an appraiser.
Okay.
If, however, the party completing the evaluation is an appraiser, then it most certainly is an appraisal.
Okay.
And I'll give you a little extra if you want it.
Yeah, well, I would just say one other thing. If they live in one of these states, if they're an appraiser that lives in one of these states that have kind of changed the rules, if you will, Tennessee comes to mind, New Orleans comes to mind. I could be wrong.
I'm fairly certain it was Georgia.
Georgia. You're right. You're right. No, you're right. It is Georgia.
But I can't remember off the top of my head. So
we're going to get all kinds of emails.
We'll figure that out later.
It doesn't matter. If they live in one of these states that have changed the rules, I can be an appraiser, I can do an evaluation, and it not be an appraisal, right?
Absolutely. And here's the thing. A lot of people really freak out when they hear that. Well, now you have this untenable situation where sometimes an appraisal must comply with USPAP, and sometimes an appraisal doesn't have to comply with USPAP. The world's going to end. Ridiculous. It's not going to end. I live in the state of Nevada, and if you do eminent domain work in the state of Nevada, guess what? USPAP doesn't apply. And the world has not stopped revolving. It's statutorily true that in the state of Nevada, if you're doing an appraisal for the purpose of eminent domain, you do not have to comply with uniform standards. You can choose to if you want to, but the state has absolutely zero authority because it's outside of their purview, and the world has not stopped revolving. It doesn't confuse anybody.
Okay. All right. Next myth or fact is evaluations should not be performed by appraisers because appraisers are professionals.
While I understand that comment, that's purely a myth. I think that appraisers, people who are trained and vested in the economic concept of value and have been providing opinions on the economic concept of value related to the tangible asset of real property for decades, are the most qualified individual to perform evaluations. So the business decision as to whether or not you participate in that book of business is a completely different question, but the question the way you read it is a myth.
Okay. All right. Good. So that actually leads me to my next myth or fact, and that is clients. Okay. So looking at this through the client's eye, clients do not want to pay appraisers to do evaluations. They would rather have less experienced people to do these types of products because it's cheaper.
So again, the litigation guy in me is reading this, and it's a myth because of the way the question is worded.
Okay.
Do you want an explanation? Or
yes, please. Absolutely.
Okay. So clients don't want to pay appraisers to do evaluations. I can tell you that that is a myth because several clients have contacted me and explicitly said they would rather have an appraiser perform the evaluations because they have a greater level of confidence in a person who has a credential as an appraiser, perhaps a designation or two from a professional appraisal organization, and is used to being held to a higher standard. The challenge is that the appraiser can't economically compete with the other parties who are providing this, and or, in my case, the appraiser wants to alter the document that's being provided, and for whatever reason, the stakeholder, the client, is saying, no, this is what we've gotten forever, this is what everybody's used to, this is what we want, can you do it? And my response is, not if I have to comply with USPAP, so I'm sorry, I can't do the assignment.
You know, what's interesting is I talked about doing desktops before, and I do desktops. But when a client approaches me, Mike, and they ask me if I'm willing to do desktops, before I've even seen their form, the very first question I ask them is, can I use supplemental material? In other words, can I alter what you give me? And if the answer is no, the conversation's done. Because I have yet to see a company approach me with something that I would consider. Now, again, reports are not USPAP compliant. Appraisers are. Let's make that distinction. But I've yet to receive one of these orders that I said, oh, I could be a USPAP compliant appraiser just using the form that they give me. It just doesn't work.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Next, myth or fact. When an appraiser performs an evaluation, they are losing money in the long run.
Myth.
Why?
Well, so myth, because you have to look at the entire process. Again, it's a scope of work issue, and it's a liability issue, especially for appraisers in those states where there's a carve-out, and they're allowed to conduct evaluations competitively, and they can figure out a way to provide a product that is better than what the clients have been receiving from other non-appraiser parties. They can always charge more. I can't imagine a circumstance where an appraiser's experience wouldn't warrant an additional fee over what that client was paying previously for a non-appraiser.
Right.
So you're not losing money unless you're performing the same scope of work that you would do for your 1004 appraisal that you're performing in your evaluation. Does that make sense?
It does, and I just want to punctuate a term that you use that I think is super important, and it leads to these myths. You didn't say that you didn't say the term that you would do less work or less credible work or anything. You said it's a different scope of work.
Absolutely.
That's so key.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that leads to, I've actually got two. This next one is not going to be a surprise to you, but the one after might be a little bit of a surprise, but I think you can handle it.
Okay.
I'm going to come from the side and flank you on this one. But,
okay.
But first to this one, when appraisers choose not to do an evaluation, the client will eventually order a full appraisal. Let me explain this before I have you answer it, Mike. I get this all the time, and I see this on Facebook, and they say, hey, appraisers unite, stand up against evaluations. If we don't do evaluations, if we say no, the client is then forced to use us for full appraisals, and I would rather get paid $450 than $150. So as long as we all stand together and say no, 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 the client will be forced to order full appraisals.
In the context of evaluations, completely a myth.
Mm-hmm. Because they can go where, Mike?
They can go anywhere.
Exactly.
And you have to realize
they will.
There is a federal definition that defines when an evaluation is required and when an appraisal is required. Now, anytime an evaluation is required, the lender or the client can choose to go to the higher level and order an appraisal. But in many cases, and you already mentioned a few of them, if it's an existing loan and they're just doing an asset, check, or it's a mortgage-backed securities bundle, or they're extending credit, or they're using the real property as collateral in a different loan, but they're not extending additional money against that specific real estate. Those are all circumstances where evaluations, according to the interagency guidelines, are perfectly acceptable. And why would I, if I was a client, if I could go get exactly what I needed to perform this particular financial transaction, if I could get it for $50 and I could get it in 24 hours or less, and my alternative was to go to an appraiser who's going to do a scope of work equivalent to a 1004 or a full-on appraisal report, and they're going to do it in the $400 to $900 range, and it's going to take a week, that makes no economic sense, right? There might be cases where it's warranted, but it just doesn't make any economic sense, and that's why this huge book of business continues to keep going, because there are other parties in the financial world that are willing to perform these evaluations, and it is incredibly profitable, incredibly profitable.
All right, Mike. This leads me to my last question, one I didn't give you previous to. I shouldn't admit that I gave you the questions previous to us coming
Well,
up.
I don't know if you could say you gave them to me. You kind of gave me a bullet point.
There you go. Okay.
So,
All right. Here's the last myth or fact, and I've heard this a lot, Mike. So help us here. Evaluations will eventually replace appraisers.
you know what? I just don't see that happening for a number of reasons. Not every transaction is a credit-related transaction. The Congress, the American people, we've bailed out the financial industry to the tune of billions of dollars. And I believe that both the public and our representatives are still very, very cautious about expanding the risk beyond what they believe is a tolerable level. Now, when we talk about that risk tolerance, we're talking about a whole different world than most appraisers understand, right? Because we're talking about billions, maybe trillions of dollars that's being securitized, moved around, transferred, and some of it is securitized by real property. And so, especially when you're dealing with brand new transactions, I don't see a time where people are going to be comfortable pushing a button, having it spit out a Zillow answer, or maybe even something a little more complicated and robust than Zillow, but having no human eyes look at it and then saying, perfect, we'll go ahead and accept it and consequences be damned. I just don't see that happening. I think appraisers.
It makes sense. Let me follow up by saying this. Then, what about the idea that the appraiser's job will change? I mean, I know that's a no-brainer. Of course, it does. It constantly does. But I'm talking dramatically, so that the world as we know it currently may not exist in the future. For example, maybe appraisers are not inspectors in the future. Maybe we rely upon a third party for that. Maybe we do have a mix of computer technology and human nature, human brain power to kind of mix those two together. So we're not strictly a Zillow type of a business model, and we're not strictly an appraiser business model, but maybe a mix of the two. What are your thoughts on that?
So I'm a firm believer that the only constant in life is change.
Right.
And I've been doing this 20 years, and things have changed. Our scope of work requirements and our liabilities, in my opinion, have gone up drastically. As far as appraisers not doing inspections, I think that's a possibility. I can see a world where at some point in the future, an appraiser is relying on a professional inspection and then doing a desktop analysis, and you're only using the inspection to determine the quality rating or the condition rating of the property. And I don't think that would diminish the value of the appraiser. Would it affect our fees? Gosh, I really hope not. I hope that my scope of work goes down and my fee either stays the same or goes up. And I think as a profession, we can make that happen if we are cautious not to just slam our foot on the table or our hand on the table and say, no, never, right? If we're open to the concept of the changing realities, not just in the appraisal world, but in the finance world, I think that it makes us viable as a profession. On the other hand, if we just say, nope, status quo, it's going to stay the same, you will order a 2055 or you will order a 1004 or you will not call me. Well, the industry is going to be forced at that point, as things change, they're going to be forced to not call you. So right. I would just caution appraisers. Now, I'm not advocating for these changes. I'm simply saying have an open mind.
The reality.
Have an open mind to the reality that financing has changed. The abundance of data has changed. I'll be honest, when I was trained, I was given a magic 3x5 card that told me what my adjustments were in every single circumstance.
I got that right.
Right? And in thousands and thousands of appraisals, that was never challenged because it's what everybody else was doing too.
Sure.
But we all know that today, I was a subject matter expert on the Appraisal Foundation's APB board for the proper methodology for adjustments in residential appraisals. Now that didn't get published because the APB just wasn't viable within the foundation. But I'll tell you, there were a lot of smart people working on that, and they were very focused on the fact that just PFAs, I call them PFAs, plucked from air adjustments,
right,
are not acceptable ever.
Right.
Nothing in USPAP says that you can just say, well, my professional experience tells me that the adjustment is X. It has to be based on data if
right,
you make an adjustment. And if you don't make an adjustment, it has to be based on data and your professional analysis, not your professional opinion. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, Mike.
So to answer your question, is the world going to change? Absolutely.
Okay.
Is it going to change for the worse? I am not Chicken Little. I believe in watching for opportunities. There's an old saying that you don't go out looking to make money. You go out looking to solve somebody's problem. And if you can solve somebody's problem, money is going to just pour into your business. So I'm always looking for how I, as an appraiser, can solve the problem of people who need to know the economic worth of tangible real property. And if I can get in the way of that, I win.
Great positive outlook on life, Mike, and a great way to end this interview. I appreciate you coming on, my friend. Anytime,
man. Call me anytime.
All right. Hey, speaking of which, and we can edit this out if we need to, do you want to give your email? Keep in mind, this podcast goes out to thousands of appraisers every week. So are you okay giving your email out?
Yeah, of course.
Go for it.
Yeah. So anybody who has questions or issues with anything that I've said today, I promise you that I will look at it eventually, but I'm crazy busy. So don't be offended if you send me something and I don't respond. If it's really, really important to you, send me something twice, 3 times. It's okay. You have my permission. Awesome. My email is mike@brunson-jew.com, and I'll spell it for you. It's MIKE@BRUNSON-JIU.com. So feel free. Send me your questions. Send me your critiques. Tell me where I'm wrong. Or especially if you have figured out how to do evaluations in compliance with USPAP and be competitive. Boy, you'll be my best friend. I'll hire you as a consultant.
Job opportunity waiting. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right, folks, that was Mike Brunson talking to us about evaluations. Mike's a great guy. I appreciate him coming on today and spending time. I want to remind you, this is going to air one day before our initial Appraiser Academy meeting. That's right, folks. Can you believe it's here already? On July 24th will be our first meeting. It's an online interactive meeting. Let me just quickly explain to you what we're talking about here, folks. I've had the All-Star team for a long time. I've had the Dream Team for a long time. The Dream Team is kind of the pinnacle. It's where you travel to a distant city and you sit in a room with other appraisers for a day, and we hash out how to be better appraisers, but more importantly, how to be more successful business owners as appraisers. It's a great, great thing for everybody that's involved, but not everybody can be involved. So I've created what's called the Appraiser Academy. It's an online meeting where the first hour or so, we're going to have kind of a webinar style back and forth where I'm teaching a principle of better business. I can tell you in the very beginning what we're going to be talking about, and that is looking outside the box and reevaluating, not valuation side, but reevaluating your business as an appraiser and looking outside the box for different opportunities. That's what we're going to be talking about tomorrow. Folks, the rest of the meeting is all about you and your questions, and it is interactive. When I say it's online, it's live, it's interactive, and we are talking together. It's going to be at 10:30 Mountain Time, and you can bring your questions. You don't have to send them in previous. You can simply ask me and say, hey, Dustin, here's what I'm dealing with in my business, and others on the call can help you out as well. And we have an opportunity to boost each other up and help each other to be better appraisers. Folks, if you are thinking about joining the Appraiser Academy, but you're just not quite sure that you're ready to make that leap financially, check us out for free tomorrow, for free. All you have to do is get on my website, theappraisercoach.com, go to memberships, scroll down, you'll see the Appraiser Academy right in the middle of the All-Star team and the Dream Team. You'll see the Appraiser Academy. Go down, just click on Learn More. And as you sign up, just use the coupon code TRYIT30. That's TRYIT and the number 30. TRYIT30. You can get 30 days free in the Appraiser Academy with no questions asked. If it's not for you, you drop out, no questions asked, we move on. But I really would like you to join me tomorrow and check it out. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised as to what we can bring you online. That's tomorrow, the Appraiser Academy. Check us out, and we will catch you next time here at the Appraiser Coach Podcast.